We're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome for Morning Coffee with Shonda Buchanan and myself today, who will be the host, Nichelle Calhoun. It's 10 a.m. in LA. So
yes,
some of you may
10
have
a.m.
coffee,
in LA.
and I'm in Washington, D.C. Yeah. So some of you may have coffee, and it's 1 p.m. in the DC area. So some of you may have lunch. But either way, we thank
With
you
coffee,
for joining
I'm
us.
sure.
There you go, with the coffee, lunch with the coffee. Coffee is very important. Either way, we are so thankful to have you here today as we open up this conversation. And I'm going to push back on the word conversation and say knowledge, the sharing of knowledge, because so often when we talk about Black identities and Native identities, it's reduced to a conversation. But we're going to open that and expand that space to talk about knowledges. And we have
exploration.
Exploration and expansion.
Yes.
So we have Ms. Shonda Buchanan here today with us, award-winning educator and author. Her book, Black Indian, has been my Bible for the week. And so I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding? Nichelle, thank you for having me. This is incredibly humbling for me to be interviewed by you and the work that you're doing as well with those sisters. And forgive me, it's the Dominican, right? You're sending, you're trying to gather some money for women in the Dominican Republic. So I visited there and I saw.
I'm so sorry.
I apologize. In the Congo. Okay, so I'll take that back. But I mean, just anyone who's giving anything.
I'm sorry. Probably couldn't hear me. Colombia. In Colombia?
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's my fault. That's my fault. I got the location incorrect. But the work that you're doing, helping women, is important. So thank you, and thank you for having me on the show, and thank you to I Love Ancestry and to Mother Earth Sanctuary as well.
Absolutely. I was very inspired, and I have been very inspired by your work. Reading through your work, I just felt an automatic kindred spirit. And I'm so thankful for the groundwork and the foundation and the buildings and the walls and the rivers that you have put into this work. I felt more rooted in my experience. And I'm hoping everyone will feel that same way. And I mean, Colombia, Congo, Dominican Republic, all a part of the diaspora, and they all need support. So thank you for saying that, and thank you for sharing that. Shonda, I want to set the tone, and you are the tone. And so I'm just going to welcome you to share your voice and stand down.
So the way that I normally start lectures and readings and talks is with some kind of a song to honor the ancestors. I do either an American Indian song or an African song, and I think that the song on my heart right now is it's a Lakota woman song that I learned in the mountains of California doing ceremony up there, and so I just want to share it as a healing song for all of us, since I know this conversation is about healing and redemption and exploration. So this is a quick song that I learned up there. Tukashiaya heyampawe, Tukashiaya heyampawe, Yani biktelo, Tukashiaya heyampawe, hey. Tukashiaya heyampawe, Tukashiaya heyampawe, Yani biktelo, Tukashiaya heyampawe, hey. And when we're in ceremony, we usually sing it 4 times for the 4 directions. So I'll stop there since we're in an interview, but I just wanted to bring in those ancestors who have struggled for us, fought for us, died for us, survived so we could be here. So thank you.
Thank you. I feel that. I feel your voice incredibly beautiful and setting the tone. And we could just go from this space right here with inviting the ancestors in, because they're always present, and just you open your mouth and there they are. So thank you. I'd like to set our intentions together in this space, and we invite the audience to listen, to receive, and to expand.
They can type intentions into the chat box as well. My intentions changed overnight, I think, or increased, let's say that. When I was thinking about it yesterday and we were talking, and I said interconnectedness, you know, and how we're connected, and the cosmology, I was talking about how, you know, there are things that we need to pay attention to, right, in terms of our past, present, and future. And I want to continue on and increase, you know, increase my intention to say that, you know, language is a way, writing for me is a way to think about how I exist in the sense of the past and the present and the future. How I exist as a Black Indian woman, how I exist as a Black person, how I exist and participate in ceremonies, in American Indian ceremonies and African ceremonies. And so it becomes this thing of coming back to the cosmology, where you are existing in multiple spaces at the same time. And I think if we can think about how we're, you know, culturally, and particularly with Black Lives Matter, how we're existing in the same space at multiple, you know, moments in our history and our culture. James Baldwin says history is trapped in us and we are trapped in history, right? And you know what, so I'm constantly thinking about that when I'm writing. So I'm setting that intention for this exploration and knowledge sharing today.
And this knowledge sharing, oh, that hit me. History is trapped in us and we are trapped in history. Oh, that is so well said. And this idea of being in different cosmological spaces that we're sharing with our ancestors throughout the generations, and we are connected. I echo your intention. I receive your intention for this, and the intention I want to co-share with you is that by reading your book and reading through some of your poetry this week, in the last, actually the last 2 weeks, I have begun to challenge my own narrative around restrictive Blackness. And that's what kept coming to my mind. I started to realize that it was okay to go into more complex stories and that my Blackness wasn't in jeopardy by doing so. And so I invite the listeners, to perhaps challenge some of the narratives that you may have, right? In this conversation, as we are connected, and perhaps finding new ways to connect to some ideas that may be new for us, because some of them were new for me. So thank you.
That's a beautiful way of introducing and setting that intention, the concept of restrictive Blackness. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Setting the intentions, and we know what we want to walk away with, what we want to leave with. So if I can brag on you a little bit and share your bio, because it's very, very impressive. I'm going to read a bit of your bio. Everyone just gives me a quick second. So I'm very excited to brag on you because this is pretty incredible work that you have done. She is the author of 5 books, born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, a daughter of mixed bloods, triracial and tri-ethnic African-American, American Indian, and European descendant families who migrated from North Carolina and Virginia in the mid-1700s to 1800s to southwestern Michigan. And we're going to get into that a little bit today, some of these stories of migration. Black Indian, which is the book we're taking a look into today. Her memoir begins the saga of these migration stories of free people of color communities, exploring identity, ethnicity, landscape, and loss. Her collection of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians, and I'm going to put a little side note in here. Badass, badass. There it is. Was nominated for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and the Library of Virginia Book Awards. An award-winning poet and educator, Shonda is a Sundance Writing Arts Fellow, a California Community Foundation Fellow, a PEN Emerging Voices Fellow, and literary editor of Harriet Tubman Press. In addition to her work as a literary activist, a teaching artist, and a mentor for young writers, she's taught at Hampton University. Okay, I know we got some people from Hampton on the call today. And William and Mary College as a writer in residence, California State University, Northridge, and Mount San Antonio College. An active board member of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, a columnist for the the LA Weekly. And Shonda received a MFA at Antioch University. She lives and writes in Los Angeles, California. And we'll talk a little bit later before we get out of here, before we exit, we will share the handles, but you can find her work at shondabuchanan.com. And then when we close out today, we'll share all the handles.
And I need to update my bio. So my memoir just won the 2020 Indie Bound Book Award for memoir for the category. So this is also an award-winning book. So I'm so grateful and humble to add that. So I have to update my bio.
Yes, but absolutely, and it's very clear why. So congratulations on that latest award. So we're in good hands with this knowledge expansion. I'll keep bragging on you. I want to give a couple acknowledgments before we move forward and get into the knowledge sharing part of our interview. And after that, we'll go into our questions, and then we'll go into some questions and answers from the chat box. Okay, so that's our layout, and then we'll close out. I also want to mention that this will be one of a 3-part series. Okay. So we will have a follow-up on July 26, 2020. I'll get a double check on the time, but we'll have all that information for you coming up. So this won't be the last, but I think you should grab your notebooks and your pens and stay tuned, but this will be the first of 3. Also, I want to give acknowledgement again to I Love Ancestry for the platform, for Mother Earth Sanctuary, and to the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County as AAHA. That's where I got started my genealogical journey, and I definitely want to shout them out. And so hopefully they will be a part of future work as we go on with this series. Yes. All right, so let's move into the knowledge sharing part. So we're going to enter this space. I feel like a lot of people feel a bit intimidated by what terms to use, and because they don't quite understand the social implications and the political implications of those terms, and they kind of hesitate. And so I want to share, and it'll be popping up shortly, so it's comfortably in some of the usage. I'm going to hold off on the racial reclassification after we go through some of the terms. But I want to start off with everyone to feel comfortable and that we can establish a common language as we go forward in this knowledge sharing platform. So starting with American Indian and Native American, we'll go back to racial reclassification. Could you kind of situate us there about these terms and use?
Yeah. So, of course, many people know American Indian is the derivation of Indian, which is, what the American Indians, we call them now, were called before. I guess you would call it politically correct term of American Indian or Native American. So those two terms, American Indian, Native American, are supposed to equate to the indigenous populations. So of the over 500 tribes that used to exist in North America, and which still applies to them today. And when you talk to anyone from those nations, they get to decide whether or not they want to be called American Indian, Indian, Native American, Indigenous, First Peoples, Turtle Island people. So I think, you know, per tribe, the terminology changes based on what people want to identify as, or based upon what the full bloods and the mixed bloods want to identify as. For me, I always say American Indian, connecting to the land, to the landscape itself. But which again, you know, is a bit of a interesting term, because America was not America, you know, until it was quote unquote established or founded by those Europeans as the Americas. So, I mean, there's so many kind of the relabeling politics, you know, are happening, you know, right here, just even in this term of American Indian and Native American. You know, of course, Native American, native to this land, but then that the term native also feels a bit to me and some other of my brethren and sistren as a bit derogatory, or even in connection to natives, or even looking at the African part of it, you know, natives in Africa. So, and that's looking at it through, we're trying to look at it through a multi ethnic lens, or at least for me, or multi-racial lens. But then it's always responding to that colonization lens, or that Europeanized lens. So. Red black. So for me, it's interesting. I probably started calling myself red black maybe about 15 years ago, because it was both. You know, it was like this, the red, quote unquote, you know, the stereotype again, or, you know, the American Indian part, and then the black, the African American part. And so it was easier, it felt more powerful to say red black. And then Black Indian became kind of the for me, a term. And I think for other people to say, if you don't know what red black means, let me let you know that I consider myself Black Indian. Like, that is my identity. I am an African American with American Indian ancestry and roots, and in this country. And then I also identify as a Black Indian. So that's where that terminology came from. Afro Native. Afro Native is the connection between that African and the Native. Again, and another powerful term. Indigenous, of course, indigenous to this landscape, indigenous to North and South America, I have to say. And then actually any peoples indigenous to a region or a landscape get to say we are the indigenous ones, which should give you a sense of the history, the ancestry, credibility, respect that you are owed and deserved, you know, for having been the first peoples of that land. But we know that doesn't always happen. Racial classification, we can, actually everything that I just said represents racial classification, and we have it on here twice, so we must mean it.
Right, that's really
We've got
important.
it first, and we've got it at the end. But everything that I just said in terms of the language identity of the American Indian, how that relates to being a Black person in America, and how we've had to kind of move from one understanding of the peoples to the understanding of the mixed blood, right? And then also, where do I fit in, and how would I like to language myself? How would I like to identify myself to others? So.
Absolutely. So it's always coming back to, what I hear, two key pieces, either the self-identification part, and then the other part is also through the lens of colonization. So it's kind of like the internal consciousness around it and the external consciousness. I was very intrigued by the word red black, because I had never seen that. And when, of course, when I opened up in your dedication and I saw red black, I mean, it just stuck out, and I said, wow, for red blacks everywhere. And
it's empowering.
I hear, it's exactly,
Yeah,
I hear Black power, I hear red power, and the combination is just like unstoppable power.
It's interesting because we had, even looking at the other terms, free people of color. So free people of color is a term.
That really struck me.
Thank you. Do you want to go on to talk about the other terms as well?
Yes, we can go on.
Okay, because it's interesting. Free people of color is a term that came about when So we have to look at the 1790 census, and if you have not done your work, for the viewers, if you haven't done your work looking at the 1790 census, and you are a person who considers yourself a genealogist or a lay historian, you have to look at how prior to 1790, the people of this land, the people who came in, so settlers, the Irish, the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch, those folks, French, and then the Africans who came at multiple times. So there are documentation that say Africans came to this landscape prior to 1619, which 1619 usually in our historical lexicon has been noted as the date that the first Africans came to Jamestown in Virginia. So, and those were Angolans who were traded, they were traded from a ship to this ship coming to Jamestown. And when they were indentured servants technically, and that group of enslaved Angolans could be baptized out of slavery. So, but there are other stories. Of course, Jack Forbes is a historian on, mixed race ethnicity, Black Indian connections. And he notes that 1503 is the first time that Africans came to Hispaniola, and the first time that the indigenous populations of that land came and stole the Africans from the Spanish governor. So that's like one of our first moments of unity and insurrection, right? So there are some multiple times where you have us coming together. But then also the free people of color term came because we were free. There were people, again, they could be baptized out of enslavement. There were American Indians who owned their land. They were respected tribally. They were brought in on decisions, right? And so then the encroachment started, the encroachment on the landscape and the need for the whites who were coming over started encroaching upon that land and started changing the way that they started seeing people. So they were like, okay, we've got free whites, just white people. We've got free, we've got American, they didn't call them American Indians, but we've got Indians is what they called them. Come back to that. And then we've got Black people. So, but the Black people they can own slaves, they can buy themselves out of slavery. So we've got free people of color. Yeah. So this is like 1700s. Okay. And so if you were a free person of color, if you were on the books as a free person of color, you could own land. If you owned land, you had a vote. You could vote. You were a part of the legislature. Okay, I'm getting all into the history. So then many things happened between the 1700s, 1750, and then 1800s. And of course, insurrections were happening, right? Slaves were rebelling. There are a lot of slave rebellions that we do not know about. But it wasn't just the slaves rebelling. American Indians were helping. There were some white people who were helping. Look at the whole John Brown history, because they knew enslavement wasn't right. So they moved from the term of free people of color, moving from free people of color up until maybe the 1830s, 1831 actually, when Nat Turner had that Nat Turner Rebellion, which changed how, so the Nat Turner Rebellion essentially, Blacks and American Indians and whites kind of went through killing slave masters. And from there, that's when the crackdown started. So free people of color could no longer hold arms in Virginia and North Carolina. Basically, they couldn't hold arms in public spaces. And then moving from the 1830s up until the 1900s, of course, this is when you have the term white supremacy or white supremacists, kind of coming in. And so there were a group of them, and they were like, okay, we're keeping the slaves down. We've taken away free people of color's right to do X, Y, and Z. We're cracking down on them. A lot of free people of color were like, we're getting out of here. We're leaving the South, and we're going to go to the Midwest, which is where my people actually went, the migration trail. So in 1924, Walter Plecker was one of the first, he was a white supremacist, the first Virginia magistrate, and the first one to propose to say, why don't we just have whites and coloreds? And so suddenly American Indians wiped out. Black people, Africans, indentured servants, bonding themselves out of enslavement, gone. Colored, all white. If you weren't white, you were colored. And that was it. So, so that's a long, big history. I'm sorry.
No, that is key. And actually, that was something that was new for me, because I think a lot of times in genealogy, especially when you're really focused on maybe African descent, there's always 1870 census, so important. It's the first time Black people are, located on the census after slavery has ended. And so that 1870, and now you just blew my mind with, no, we got to go back to that 1790 census, because there are classifications of free people of color. So that is really, really helpful. And that's why I was really honing in on that free people of color, is that it's this, just how you explained, is this encompassing, and this is this erasure.
Exactly. And see, that's what we say, paper genocide, right? It is as if someone did like this and just started erasing the indigenous population. In fact, from the 1790s, 1790, 1800s, 1810, 1820 is when the people who prior to that were free people of color could, depending on where they lived and who knew them, they could claim Negro, or they could start claiming mulatto, which mulatto was is one of the terms that kind of became a Black and a white person, not necessarily including the Indian part, right? So it's like, okay, you're mulatto. That means you are mixed. So we'll give you that, but you're not white, and you're not a free person of color. You're mulatto. So the term became interchangeable, for the people themselves. They could decide to claim. But there was a period, like a swath of maybe 20 or 30 years, when American Indians were just other. And so like their tribes were raced out. Their nations were erased. They were other, living in the homes, or enslaved, or married to white people, or married to quote unquote Negroes or mulattoes. And then, so it's so fascinating how the identity of the indigenous population, American Indians, the Africans who came, sometimes marrying or becoming relatives of those of the American Indian nations, even some of the white people, some white folks, kind of all of those nations they tried to homogenize it. And in the homogenizing, they kind of watered some of the things down. And then in watering identities, watering ethnicities down, made us develop a kind of a conflict about our own sense of self. And this is, again, I have to come back to, this is where we started having the sense of self-hatred, right? It's like, if the dominant society says that we are not who we are, that we can't claim ourselves. We can't claim the Indian. We can't claim the white. What does that mean? Is there something that we're supposed to hate? Is there something we're supposed to leave behind? And of course, we know the predominant stereotypes and propaganda, perpetuated that sense that if you were dark skinned, if you were African, if you were Indian, then you were quote unquote, savage, or then you were less than, right? And so this is when from that whole period, the 1750 to 1850s, this is where I believe that institutional racism is just really started to instill itself. And the policies, oh my gosh. So the belief systems of some people who kept us down started to infiltrate those policies, even though some people tried to fight them, even though free people of color did have the votes, in certain times, and they tried to fight them. But you can see institutional racism instilling itself, as in the forced sterilization of American Indians and Africans, people of color, right? Starting in the 1900s and moving up into 1960s and 1970s,
Wow.
right? Not even asking if they wanted to be sterilized. They would sterilize 11-year-old girls, you know, I mean, just, and this is the Indian Health Bureau themselves, right?
This is the
So
Indian,
institutional,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the one.
the Indian Health Center itself. So a lot, we always say, you know, Bureau of Indian Affairs, you know, wasn't always just full-blood Indians trying to help Indians. You know, there were white people who were in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But you can look at economic disparity and how, you know, people of color had the least resources with regards to the books that were coming in, the materials that were coming in, the teachers that were going into those schools. Institutional racism, you have to look at Indian schools, where the Carlisle School, even at Hampton University, where I used to work, when they brought, this is a whole nother discussion, but when they were taking and stealing and it was sanctioned kidnapping of American Indian students and forcing them into those schools. Some American Indians said, you know what, let's send our kids to those schools so they can have an education and they can speak the white man's language, right? And that's documented in many texts. Nico King's actually is a great book if you want to look at a novel about that. But when those Indian students got to those schools, they cut their hair. They told them, you can't wear your own regalia. They would beat them if they spoke their language, their native tongue, any other day except Sunday. Like, you know, so it was like General Armstrong, who is technically the founder of Hampton University, a white man.
Wow.
His motto was kill the savage. Kill the savage, save the man. And for Hampton University is technically historically Black college.
Right.
So his first motto was kill the slave, save the man, or, you know, kill the savage slave or the Negro, save the man, right? So, I mean, there's so much, if we laid all of the moments where you could look at the disparity and lay all those moments where institutional racism started to sink its teeth into the policies that subjugated us, then you can fast forward and see why it is acceptable, you know, for some white people to see the killing of Blacks and to say, I didn't do that. It wasn't my fault.
Right.
Did they do something to deserve it? Mm-hmm. That's like, what in your DNA, what in your family history, your societal history allows you to not even pay attention until we are in the streets, until we are demanding #this, until we are showing up with the threat of death because of COVID, and we are showing up. So institutional racism has its teeth in the founding of this country.
That is so well said. You know, just to not even pay attention. What is in the history? What is in the society? It's in the DNA of it. Just like you said, so foundational, and that's what is creating these levels of response.
Yeah,
it's just too long.
And you have to forgive me because I can go on. It's like when something happens, I can see a direct correlation. When this happens, I'm like, oh, when Breonna Taylor's killers are still out there, I'm thinking, oh, Venus Hottentot. And if you don't know about Venus Hottentot, so the story of Sarah Bartman, African woman stolen from her people in Africa, and then given to it's called the London, what was it called? It was like a menagerie. It was like the equivalent of the Barnum and Bailey circus in London. And they would put Sarah in a cage above the crowd. And because her derriere was her rump, her butt was more like pronounced and prominent, and her breasts were more pronounced and prominent than they had ever seen in England, she became like an overnight attraction. Yeah. Here is the Black woman's body on display, right? And so from there, that moment, I'm thinking, when I see that Breonna's killers are still out there, killers, not just police officers, murderers, I'm thinking, this was okay because it was okay for Sarah Bartman to be in that cage. When when will it not be okay?
Yeah. Oh, that is a powerful comparison. I mean, just like earlier when you were mentioning the different countries, it is these global systems based on white supremacy, right? And that
Mhm.
are lived out uniquely in each space, but they're still interconnected. It's still
Absolutely.
the same threads that feel them. Yes, that is very powerful. And I think this is the power of um, history, genealogy, going back and recovering. There's so much that hasn't been fleshed out from our perspectives and our understandings. And so we're so disconnected from the realities of history. But then when we do genealogy, when we start to do the ancestral work, because I consider genealogy as ancestral work, is
Absolutely.
really get
I
into the
agree.
people's history,
I
the
agree.
people's history and the people's story. And so I want to go back a little bit. We had one more term that
Oh,
was listed, and if you that's okay. I think the term was removed, so that's okay. But it was very interesting for me, and I think it helped kind of situate. I was very interested in the racial reclassification aspect, and you spoke on
oh
that. Oh, okay, here it comes again.
yeah.
And social media handles.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
think
right.
that's why I was really interested in the racial reclassification. You touched on that, and and we can keep talking about that when we get to some of the questions. But for people who may not be familiar with the Dawes rolls or the Guion Miller African Cherokee rolls, could you speak briefly on that as we enter Black Indian?
Yes. So the Dawes rolls is one of many rolls for the 5 civilized tribes. So each of the tribes have their own separate rolls, but the Dawes rolls was an amalgamation of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole Indians who in between 1828 and 1832 were removed from the southeast and the south of our country. So um, prior to that, those 5 tribes had decided that they were going to try to westernize themselves. So they didn't necessarily cut their hair, but they voluntarily started wearing Western gear and Western garb, and they started owning slaves. But then Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, who was also known as an Indian fighter or the Indian fighter, was nominated, and he was the architect of the Indian Removal Act of 1830s, 1830, 1831. So this is when they said to the 5 civilized tribes, even though you own slaves, even though you look like us in your Western clothing, we still want your land. So
Mm-hmm.
so we're giving you a year to move, and we'll give you some money, but you got to go. So so those 5 civilized tribes said, okay, let me not say that. Okay, it was never how can I say, not necessarily an agreement amongst the 5 tribes. There were always their chiefs and their vice chiefs and that kind of a thing. So some alternate discussions did happen, but the ultimate result is if they didn't leave, they were forcibly marched from their homelands, from their tribal lands, and put on the Trail of Tears. They also call it the Great Walk or the Trail where they cried, and they were deposited into um, Oklahoma and Alabama. So just kind of just the nations that already existed there were forced to make room, right?
Okay.
So each of those Indians had to sign rolls. They had to say, I'm Martha Blackbird. I'm John Bear. I'm, this is my nation. I'm full blood. I'm, whatever it was. So they had to sign the rolls, the Dawes rolls,
Okay.
and the Guion Miller rolls. So from the Dawes rolls, um, really developing 1830s signatures on the rolls, X's on the rolls. So from that march and relocation, the forced relocation or displacement, we could talk about that too. But there were a lot of people, full bloods and mixed bloods who said, well, I'm Indian, but I don't want to go there, so I'm going to go someplace else. Or I left my reservation, or I left my land or my peoples before, so they couldn't claim their Indianness. which is what happened with my people, the Coharie, the Eastern Band Cherokee, and Delaware Cherokee. So for my people, we got on the migration trail much earlier. Yeah, we got on the migration trail. If I'm looking at my staffers, my manuals, my Matthews, they got on the migration trail about maybe late 1700s, somewhere around there. And then they deposited themselves in Indiana, which is where we also established some of the first free people of color settlements in Indiana and also in Michigan. So, but we weren't on the rolls. So the Guion Miller rolls, also called the African Cherokee rolls, they came back and they said, this is in the 1900s, so it was really 1904 to 1906, 7, where they said, okay, there are some of you out there who petitioned, you say that you have Indian blood. We're going to go around, Guion Miller's, developing a team. So we would like you to tell us how you're connected to the tribes, or the Indian tribes, or the Cherokee tribes, the Eastern Band Cherokee tribes. And so my Staffords, my Roberts, my Matthews, many people sign those rolls. So, and I have a copy of that as well. I'm actually going to be showing that when I do my, I'm doing a genealogy a webinar on July 31st. And so I'm going to show, go through kind of the African Cherokee rolls, and maybe even show some of the other names. But if your name is on there, that means that your people had a verbal, like, affirmation and a connection, right? Even if they couldn't write, even if they were illiterate, their people had said to them, you're Cherokee, or your uncle, or your grandmother, or you're this, right? And so that's a verbal, for us, oral history is what we live by, right? This is how people are speaking our identity into us.
Yes.
So they signed the rolls, and then Guion Miller and his team went back through and said, this person was a slave, or this person was not connected, or this person has no connection. So they basically decided for those people, despite the letters, despite the verbal connection to people who were linked and already on those rolls as family members, they said, you know what? They can't get allotment, or land allotment. Like, so no, we're not going to count them, and they can't have land, and they can't have any money. So, so that's the Guion Miller rolls, the African Cherokee rolls. And when I found it I was doing my family research in, what's this? So 2005, 6, 7, somewhere around there. And I found it, and I printed the whole thing off. And now you can't find it online.
Wow.
So I was like, isn't that interesting?
Really? Really?
Well,
I'm glad you got it.
National Archives.
I'm super glad
you try
you
to
got
find it for the National Archives, but I have my copy, yeah.
I'm glad you got it in your possession, so you don't have to go through all that. And when you were saying that, I'm so glad that you plugged your genealogy workshop, and I'm going to repeat the date, July 31st, right?
July 31st, and it's 1 p.m. East LA time, Pacific time, and it'll be, so what's that, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Perfect. Because I know those roles were, when I was coming across that during some of the reading, I had never heard of those roles before. And it automatically, my mind went to equating, and I thought about the Free Negro Register. And I thought about, wow, when you're able to locate, it really gives you another branch of your family story that you may not have envisioned. And I think that's so incredible, especially in visibilizing Afro Native stories.
It's really
you talked about the oral. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, isn't that fantastic that so I love how you're talking about the seeing a name on the Negro Registry, or seeing a name on the Guion Miller African Cherokee rolls, allows you a different understanding of your ancestry, and then allows you a different understanding of yourself in this present time, right? That is empowering beyond belief, beyond words. And one of our other sisters, Danica with Mother Earth Sanctuary, said in one of our talks, she said that placemaking, right? The term of placemaking. Yes. the creation of your own space. And I come back to the Gnosticism of it, the creation of your own cosmology, you know, in connection to those ancestors. And this is a thing I truly believe that this is a thing that we need, that kind of self-awareness to the past, the present where you exist, and the future, like speaking ourselves into the future as multiracial people, as knowing who our ancestors are, as multi-identity people, right? There's no need to codify us. And the only need to codify is to control. The only need to label or to relabel a people or someone is to have access or to have power over them. And many culturalists and many academicians have talked about Henry Louis Gates and Toni Morrison and Bell Hooks and Cornel West. And we're talking about the power of naming and the power of renaming yourself in relation to who your people were and where you want your kids to go and your grandkids to go.
Oh my goodness, that is a word. I would just say, to codify is only for the purposes of controlling, and this is clear once we start to look and see what is the reality of these families and all these multiple identities. It looks nothing like what we've been taught. Absolutely. It looks like the Plecker version.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes. If you're white, you're right. If you're not, get back. You know what I mean? And it's just another version of that. You have access or not access. And that's pretty much, we're going to make it simple. The racialization basically is the dehumanization. So by going back and recovering these stories, we actually, not that we're trying to prove that we're human to others, but we embrace more of our humanity. So I think that is so powerful what you said. It actually reminds me of one of your poems, I think, where you go through and you talk about, that codifying to count, to the census, another way of looking at the census.
Yeah, yes. I say in what the census means to a mixed blood, to promulgate, to propagate, to rape, to disown, to tithe, to control, to hold us down, to put something in my mouth, to see Jane run. And if you can put my identity in my mouth, that means you have power over me. But if I can put my own identity in my mouth, you have no power over me. I know who I am.
Right. If I can put my identity in my mouth, that's right. Oh, wow. That's so powerful. Actually, if we could go ahead to what you were just speaking about, and I'm going to pull up this question because I'm going to skip a little ahead because you touched on it already about, so many Black families, they have the oral history that I've got Indian in my family. And there's a very complicated relationship with that. There's pride for some people, and others look at it as, I think you use the words, it's a compliment, it could be a compliment or a cuss, based on, are you distancing yourself from being Black? Why are you holding on to that aspect? And so
I love this new t-shirt that came out. There's a new t-shirt, and I can't remember the people who did it. They're on Instagram, but it says mixed blood and hella Black, right? Mixed and proud and hella Black. And so I'm like, that's me.
Yes. I love that. I would love for you to, if you don't mind, reading a little bit of page 63, and then maybe we can talk about that mixed blood and hella Black, that complexity.
Sure. So do you want me to read the whole page or just
where it says sometimes Black folks give me
yes. So sometimes Black folks give me the look when I say I am American Indian as well as African American. It's simple, I think. 50-50, like two sides of a coin. Girl, please. I get the neck roll and the corresponding roll of the eyes. You know you Black, heifer. Or everybody got some Indian in them. Don't get uppity. Not as many as we think. according to Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s work in genealogy, where he basically says very few African Americans possess American Indian ancestry based off of the sheer disproportionate ratio of Africans to Indians in the New World. But my red-black friends disagree vehemently with Gates' hypothesis. And I say vehemently twice.
Yes.
And I guess I'll pause there to say one of the panel discussions, I mean, there were people so angry. We were talking about how he was, it felt to us, those of us whose identities and our records and our own history gave us the sense that we could say we were Indian too. It felt like he was attacking us. Mm-hmm. And it also felt like he wasn't taking into account, I guess I'll say it like that, the 10th generation, the 11th, the 13th generation. And so because people marry, begat, the full-blood, American Indian becomes watered down, or the full-blood African becomes watered down. But we are still, no matter how watered down the African becomes, we are still considered Black, African American, in America, connected to Africa. Mm-hmm. What about the American Indian piece? Why are we not still considered or allowed to consider the American Indian piece, being in this land, having some kind of connection? Someone married somebody and begat. Why can we not claim that? Right. So we were really arguing, like that whole panel. We were so mad at him. We were like, oh, he shouldn't come in this room. But I appreciate Gates, everything that Gates has done. I appreciate his work as a scholar. But that was a moment. So, okay, so do you want me to keep reading, or do you want me to read a little bit more?
Please.
So I will, I think I'm going to skip down to, tragically for American Indians who kept oral traditions and communicated via images and symbols, their only written records were, ass out, as my grandfather would say. Europeans didn't understand and therefore did not value signs, symbols, and other identifiers of tribal importance. Tribal councils at first didn't see the need to keep records, and Chief Tecumseh created a Cherokee language in relation to English. Tecumseh realized that his people had to prove who they were to be counted or validated in white society. And then he assumed a written language would protect them, but he was wrong. Even their ancestors who had roamed the land for thousands of years before Columbus, nothing would protect them from the British, the Scots, Irish, French, Dutch, and Portuguese who descended upon America with greedy, land-hungry eyes. And then I go on to talk more about my family history and how one of my aunts essentially, it was interesting because my great aunt Catherine, who in my book, I talk about her in the book of poetry too, and I talk about how she didn't like the darker skinned family members, but she sure was like our first record keeper. She wrote down who was, so one of my great grandmothers, she said full-blood Delaware Cherokee, Annie Peake. She wrote down who was considered mulatto, who was considered Negro, who was considered a free person of color. I mean, I have to give thanks to my Aunt Catherine for those first records and dates of death and births, to the best of her ability. And then I got to be the one, the record keeper. I got to be the one to kind of to pull them together and to see all the strands of my family. And then see if when I leaned back and I could see in fifth, sixth, and seventh generation who my full bloods were. Wow. Right, who my full blood American Indian ancestors were. And then only from DNA could I see what my generations of full blood Africans were, because I don't have any connection. I don't have a direct connection to Africa. And that's the whole story of Black people in this country.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's something, I really appreciated what you said about going back to that 10th, 11th generation, because I think that we really concentrate heavily on after cotton really expands in the United States. And then we see, we kind of situated to like the lower South and, then Maryland and Virginia and these areas that had um, very early interactions in North Carolina with the three groups of people are kind of lost into the narrative of Black slaveholding Deep South and white aristocracy. And
Mm-hmm.
that is the narrative. So it's not much room for any other spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate saying going back
Yeah,
to that 10th and 11th
right.
generation.
Yep.
That's really
Mhm. And can I say
interesting and
something
really,
too about? I'm so grateful that you brought up the blacks, the white aristocracy, and then the black kind of the black enslaved, the black sharecroppers. Right, that piece. But it's interesting because they were colored. They were considered colored or
mm,
Negro at the time. So you don't know who was full-blood American Indian or mixed-blood American Indian on that landscape because we're considered blacks on picking cotton and blacks picking tobacco
yeah,
unless someone says it orally, right? So that becomes our
right,
identity in this country, as opposed to someone who was an American Indian who was connected to a nation or who knew their tribes, who knew their people, who knew the regalia, right? And so I do think, again, here's another way of us codifying like an
mm,
image of who we are. And we have to, like, how can we survive if we don't know who we are, right? That's the whole Sankofa principle. If you don't know where you have been, you don't know where you're going. We have to do that still as Black people in America. We are Black and we are proud. I am Black and I am proud. No one can take that from me. But I get to look at the multiple ethnicities and the multiple racialities that have made me up and make my ancestors up. No one can take that from me either.
no, and I love that it doesn't endanger the other. It
It
doesn't. It
doesn't,
just.
yeah.
And I love that. That's something new that's coming into my consciousness as of your work is that it doesn't endanger to look at these multiple identities. And there's so many questions to uh, that we have because it's been so simplified. But I think just like as you said earlier, I think about in my own family story. I trace my family on my mother's side, my mother's maternal side, back to the late 1700s, and I did not even know my family was free since 1808. I just assumed. I had just assumed that my family was enslaved. And so I was focused on the 1870. I didn't know about a free Negro register. And I'm like, whoa. And the time that I find her on the free Negro register, my fifth great grandmother, she was actually the exact same age that I was when I saw her. And so it just really, like you were talking about, that connection, So now I carry Betty Lawson everywhere I go. And so that direct connection. But now I want to go back and I want to really look into
Mm-hmm.
some of the resources that you shared today, and I'm sure people will learn about on July 31st with the genealogy, because I
Yes.
really think you given permission for us to say I'm Black and I could be mixed blood too,
Yes. Yeah.
and um, and that is okay. Like neither one is in danger. They're
Neither one is
both
in danger.
safe.
No, I said I mean, ask Maimuna, that amazing, beautiful activist singer, right? Ask Redmina Cody, the activist singer, just amazing artist, Danae's sister, Black and Danae, who was raised by her Danae grandmother. I mean, there's so many of us dancing at powwows, and we've had to go back and learn our traditions and learn the culture of our ancestors, and then we come to the ceremonies, to the powwow in a respectful, way, in the best way that we can. So no, nothing is that danger. I think the danger is the not knowing. I
Yeah,
think the danger, the lack of knowledge of self, Marcus Garvey, is the danger. Yeah. Toni Morrison's books, are
yeah,
all about rediscovery.
absolutely. And actually, when you said Toni Morrison, I actually think about a mercy. Now that I'm kind of
Yes.
thinking about this, kind of looking at this time period, this early time period where these relationships that now seem, for many of us who've been disconnected historically, seem very foreign, but the way you lay it out is very clear. That's always been the case. It's always been the
Please.
case. Always. And I want to touch on this because your book is a memoir about your family. And you talked about your great aunt Catherine and her scribbles, and how you went back, scribbling down the lines of this person is this, and this is that. Many of us, I feel like when it comes to genealogy, I'm going to hit it from two sides. Many of us feel intimidated that we don't have enough information. And you've literally done incredible work tracing generations of your family from North Carolina over to Kalamazoo and these different spaces with the scribbles. And I'm not trying to
I know.
lessen her work, but I mean, not totally formulated, because she's also trying to glean, right, what she can get from oral histories and what's being passed down. But you have been able to do such incredible work. So I want people to be reminded that there's power in just even the bits. If someone has some oral history and they're saying something about Afro Native background, dig deep, dig
Write it
there.
down. Write it down. Talk to the eldest in your family, the eldest ancestors about that. Write it down. Do the research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do the research. And that is what I want to come into when we talk about doing the research. We're going to hit and we're going to be able to see our own family members. And in your work as a memoir, you definitely build out who your family was through your eyes and through your experience. And that is such brave work. That's such brave work.
It was hard work.
And hard work.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said through my. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, I was gonna say I appreciate how you said through my eyes and my experience, because that's what a memoir is. A memoir is a book from one person's perspective, based off of memories and events of the past, right? And so I have had family members over the years who've reacted differently when I've said to them, "Hey, I'm writing a book about the family, the good and the bad. Can I interview you for this? Can I interview you for that piece? I'm recording. Do you see me recording?" And then I've had some people react differently over the years. And what I have learned, how I've learned to respond to that is, if you don't like my version of the family history, then write your own book, because my purpose was to look at how my family's lack of self-knowledge, the loss of our ancestry and history on all sides, created a rupture for the family. And there was a thing in the Black Power movement, it was Black Ungawa, Black Power, right? So we're connecting ourselves to Ungawa, an African word, but we don't know where that word came from. It was just like a alliteration, and so there was a feeling for me and my family that we didn't even have language. We didn't have a connection. And because we didn't have a connection to our ancestors, and because we didn't know who we were, we acted out in various ways, which is what I talk about in my book. We were a dysfunctional family. And when I read across the country, and I've gotten multiple emails and messages from people saying, "You wrote about my family. My family is this, my family experience of this, how I can see my aunt, I can see my sister, I can see, me, just kind of observing and saying, what is happening in this family?" And I just traced it back to, I didn't even know who so I knew who my grandfather was, but it took a while for me to really understand who my great grandmother was. And then that was it. I didn't even have I didn't know who her people were. I didn't know who, so it was like, why don't we have this knowledge? Why don't we have this history? Everyone else has this history. Why don't we have it? So I just thought we had ruptured. And I was writing this book to try to bring us back together to as a prayer, really, to a place where we could come back together. Or maybe it's for me, maybe I can come back together, and then I get to be someone who says, this is what I did for me as a writer, as a researcher, as a Black Indian woman in this country, and anyone can do the same.
Absolutely. Definitely, it's clear that you are weaving together these generations and situating, and you have the framework and the lens to be able to say, you know, this is the connection between what's happening at the institutional, the structural shows up in the personal. And the personal is not distance, it's not because someone said something offensive, it's all the intergenerational trauma that happens from, and I'm going to touch words because I know that's key to your work, the migration, the displacement, and the myths that you don't deserve to be rooted. And I thought that came across very clearly. I was going to ask if you could read another passage where you talk a bit about your grandfather. I'm sorry about that. I lost my own notes. One second.
So I want to say thank you to anyone who's out there listening on Facebook or YouTube or Zoom. You know, thank you all for being here, and please feel free to, you know, drop me a note, Instagram me. I'm on IG. I respond to Instagram.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for sharing with us. We will open up the chat box soon, and I apologize. I'm having a little bit of issue getting to my my text. Okay.
Yes.
Page
I see
70.
a question. There's a
you
question.
see a question? Okay, sure. We can go to questions there. Let's see here.
Someone said, how can there be unity between the Indigenous and the Black communities? Yes, that's a great question. So I will answer it in the simplest way that I can is show up. So you show up with your oral history. This is how it happened for me. I showed up to a ceremony. Someone took me to a ceremony and I said, my ancestors are this, like, this is what I have. My dad said we're Choctaw. My mom says we're Indian. I don't know that Indian tribe. This is maybe 20 some odd years ago, 22 years ago. And, but I'd grown up with this oral history. And so the people were like, okay, all right, well, you come on in here. And then I just was silent, and I was silent for maybe 10 years, like really, and just quiet and just like learning songs and, you know, trying to understand the 4 directions, what that meant for us. And, you know, trying to understand that because it was there for me to learn. So I showed up. Someone else told me sometimes it's not that easy for people. You show up and then people will, you know, ostracize you, or people will not talk to you, or, you know, you go to a powwow and they'll maybe question you and ask you like, why are you here? And I understand how the visible, our visible Blackness, what we call that visible Blackness, the darker skin, can make some people step back from you or put you outside of the American Indian culture. And this is where you have to decide for yourself. I know who I am. I know who my ancestors are. And I feel that they will see that respect that you have for yourself and your ancestors. And then at a certain point, maybe not that time, maybe a year later, they will let you in and they'll say, you know what, why don't you come to this? Or why don't you show up here? I've seen it multiple times where that's happened. So that's just personally on that personal level. But you can always show up to a powwow. You can research the family, the location that your family is in. What's that tribe? You know, what's the tribe there? Does that tribe have any kind of powwows or green corn ceremonies? Is there a way that you can go there and maybe even start to befriend some of those people, and you can talk about your ancestors, maybe even compare names of your people, see who you're actually related to. So someone said, how can there be unity when Africans become part of native tribes? Did they have to go through any ceremonies and trials? Yes. Were they able to marry into tribes without necessarily being a part of the tribal, part of ceremony in a formal way? Yes. So Africans were saved or rescued, some of them, from enslavement. Some of the full-blood nations would go and take them and get them. When Africans escaped into the bush, they would happen upon a village, and that village would say, okay, you know, either adopt them, you know, prior to the owning of the slaves, quote unquote. If that African or Africans proved themselves in that tribe, in that nation, they could be adopted, they could marry into that family. There was a period of time after the French Indian Wars where the full-blood population in the southeastern area was so depleted that full-blood American Indian women started buying black men as slaves, but then they would marry them and free them. So, I mean, that's a moment of unity for Blacks and Indians. When the Buffalo Soldiers were fighting in out west, Buffalo Soldiers were black men. They called them Buffalo because their hairs were woolly, and so the American Indians gave them that name, Buffalo Soldier. And then they were fighting against the Indians at the time, but when they stopped fighting, some of those black men stayed and married American Indian women and begat and had their black Indian children. There's a story of Frank York, who was the black slave of Lewis and Clark. He was the black slave of Clark for the Lewis and Clark expedition across that southwestern part of the country. So Wyoming, Montana, Missouri, like all that area, because they wanted to, Lewis and Clark were tracking the, supposedly tracking the Missouri River, right? But they were also checking out the tribes in those areas. Sacagawea, I have to honor that ancestor. Sacagawea was also one of the translators, a full-blood woman translator with her baby on her back, who was also with the Lewis and Clark expedition. But York, Frank York, Clark's slave, the story is that when he went into some of the Indian tribes, some of the Mandan camps up in the Yellowstone Park area, that they basically were like, hey, we haven't seen anyone like you before. Would you mind laying with us? You know, and would you mind, because we love a baby with your skin. Like, so those are some, some, you know, just a few of the intersections that historical intersections that have happened, but it's been in multiple ways, multiple times. So, and then you can be formally adopted into a people. You can do certain ceremonies to be adopted by a tribe. And so I'm also adopted Gravon, one of my my ex-husband's grandpas, we call it. For those of you who know, sometimes if somebody is someone helps you understand the tribe, they can become an uncle or a grandpa or an auntie or a grandma. So you can call them that, but then there's a formal ceremony to actually adopt you into a tribe. And so I was adopted into the Gravon tribe up in Montana, which they're like, you know, they're my people. I go up there, I do ceremony up there, and just, you know, just like a good, funny, you know, funny people. So yeah.
Incredible.
I hope I answered your question.
That's incredible. And thank you for the questions. I know we are getting a little slim on time.
Oh, we are.
But I would like, before we start to close out, I would love for you to read from page 72, and starting from where it said, "But I've got Grandpa."
Okay.
And again, thank you for our questions, and thank you again to the I Love Ancestry platform. Yes. This is incredible. See, this was not a conversation. This was knowledge sharing.
Knowledge sharing, exploration.
Exploration and
a reclamation.
A reclamation and the expansion. So we're going to keep expanding. I think we have a lot more to talk about. So I think we can continue this conversation in the series.
July 30th. Yeah.
July 30th. Remember, genealogy workshop. Is that genealogy? Oh, no, sorry. Second.
Oh, so I'm having a genealogy. I'm calling it a webinar. And so that's July 31st, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Yeah.
Okay, July 31st is the genealogy workshop. So that's where you can come and learn how to really research your multi-ethnic roots. If some of these documents were new to you today, okay, this is going to be a good time to learn about it and how to read it. Yeah. But July 26th, let me correct. July 26th.
I apologize. That's my fault. July 26th, yes.
No, that's okay. July 26th is our second installment of the series. Okay, so stay posted via social media and I Love Ancestry platform. And we'll do part 2, which will be Sunday. So just in case you're at work, you don't have to sneak away, you know, and be late for your lunch break and things like that, even though many people are working from home, not everyone is. And we want this to be as inclusive as possible. So I love if you could just share a bit of page 72 with us.
Yes, and I love the idea of someone sneaking away, you know, to an early lunch to do, you know, to listen to this. So that would be awesome. Okay, so this is a section from my Black Indian. But I've got Grandpa Tone's Mississippi love triangle. I've got family trees and tombstones. I've got oral history and memory. There's an African proverb: if the lion could speak, the true history of Africa would be told. Perhaps if the buffalo of the plains or the waterfowl of the riverways and tributaries of this land could speak, the true history of the indigenous American would be told. But who or what will tell the Black Indians' history?
That is so incredibly powerful. And that reclamation of telling this intersection and rooting it in the land. So thank you. I would also, if we have time just to hear from your, is this your first work, Who's Afraid of Black Indians? Your first published?
Yes, this is my first book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians.
Yes.
And I just put my website in the chat box in case anyone wants to go to my website and learn more about these books or the work that I do as a writer, educator, lecturer. But I'd love to read if you want me to read. You tell me which one.
Please, Black Indian.
Okay. Yes. All my journeys began in North Carolina without my knowing it. Black Indians pushed like September crab shells on an angry winter shore, swept up in the storm of Moby Dick's adventure. The literature of us wiped and creamed against an outcrop of colonizing rocks, our acorn, our buckskin, our dreaming crushed, corrected. Under the weight of change, we became husks of ourselves. We were Nusiyuk, fading into Coharie, ghosts on a riverbank. We were red-black wolves chewing our wrists from the arm. We fought next to the Tuscarora, beating ourselves into a story of lush rivers and swampland and defeat, unaware of the coming. Saddles and horses and silver and white mouths sweeping us up in their fingers like dust in the corners of black powder pouches. We ran. My family escaped from that swampland in Sampson County into Tennessee to Indiana and then Michigan. Indian, mulatto, colored, Black. We planted ourselves next to the Potawatomi and the Odawa like corn stalks, and we grew into a farmhouse on fire.
Oh, thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your questions, your presence. I mean, just this not discussion, this exploration, this expansion has been really wonderful. It's one of my favorite interviews. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for all this red black power.
Yes.
Thank you for planting it in my spirit and in my consciousness. And I hope that everyone who joined us today felt the same way and will continue to complicate those narratives that have tried to simplify us, because that is, as she puts it, controls us.
Absolutely. Walk with it. Walk with the knowledge that it is not everything it seems, right? And walk with the knowledge that you get to define yourself. We get to define ourselves based off of our ancestors. We get to empower ourselves with language and placemaking.
And placemaking. Shout out to Mother Earth Sanctuary and placemaking.
Yes.
And we put our names in our mouths. We put our names in our mouths. Yes. I want to thank you for your work, from the writing aspect to the genealogical to the historical. It is interdisciplinary and it is incredible. There's so much poetic justice in your work that it just comes off of the page. And I'm really thankful for this opportunity because it has expanded me. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to read your book.
You'll be my resource. I'm gonna need to come to your genealogy workshop. I would like to share our handles, and if we can get that slide up just one more time. Thank you for your questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. Here's our handles. You can find Shonda Buchanan, of course, her website, shondabuchanan.com, and on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Okay, and then, oh, there's myself, but I'm being blindfolded by the, excuse me one second. You can find me at A Nubian 80 or Songs of Yemaya, or about Perpetual Blackness through perpetualblackness.com. And I Love Ancestry is on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. That's how you're accessing this platform. Thank you again to I Love Ancestry, or iloveancestry.com. And also Mother Earth Sanctuary is on Instagram, and m.earth.s at icloud.com. Sorry if I jacked that up at the end, but I thank you all. And you can also find Mother Earth Sanctuary on LinkedIn as well. Excuse me for not mentioning that at the end. We'll see you for the next installment of our series. We have so much more to delve into. In the meantime, get Black Indian, okay? Get Black Indian. Who's Afraid of Black Indians? Actually, you know, I went through the poetry first and into here, and that was a beautiful entry into this. But everybody, you do it how you like, and you can find on Amazon and
Amazon. Indie Bound is another one. I know Barnes and Noble has it as well. So there are multiple places in it. You can still request it from any Black bookstore around the country, SO1, Mahogany, of any of your local bookstores in your area. You can request it in libraries as well. You can ask your library to purchase the book so you can have it on hand.
Excellent. There you go. All right, Red Black Power. Until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.